he was born a nobody. Illegitimate, underestimated, and surrounded by enemies. But by the time he died, he had conquered a kingdom, rewritten its future, and left a legacy that would shape Europe for centuries. This is the story of William the Conqueror, how he rose from a dangerous childhood in Normandy to claim the crown of England, and how that crown came with a price. William was born around 1028 in the town of Falaise in the Duchy of Normandy. He was the only son of Duke Robert I of Normandy, and his birth came with controversy. His mother was not the Duke's wife, but the daughter of a local tanner. Because of this, William was considered illegitimate and would later earn the nickname William the Bastard. Despite his questionable status, Duke Robert recognized William as his heir. In 1035, Robert set out on a pilgrimage to Jerusalem, a journey from which he would never return. Before departing, he named his young, illegitimate son William as his heir, a bold and risky move that infuriated many Norman nobles. When Robert died on the road, William, still only 7 or 8 years old at the time, inherited the title of Duke of Normandy. But a child duke with no legitimate birthright and no father to defend him was a vulnerable target. Normandy descended into chaos, and William's life hung in the balance as powerful barons vied for control. When William became Duke of Normandy in 1035, he was an illegitimate child suddenly thrust into one of the most dangerous positions in medieval Europe. His father's death left a precarious power vacuum, and Normandy, already a volatile land ruled by ambitious and violent barons, quickly descended into chaos. Without a strong central figure to enforce order, local nobles began acting like petty warlords. They were seizing lands, defying authority, and settling scores through bloodshed. William's early reign was dominated by a rotating cast of guardians who struggled to maintain control in his name. The first of these, his great-uncle Alan of Brittany, provided early protection but died not long after Robert's passing. Others, like Gilbert of Brionne and Osborne the Steward, tried to guide and safeguard the boy duke but met violent ends. Gilbert was ambushed and killed, and Osborne was murdered at night in William's own chamber as he slept nearby. These assassinations were not isolated acts of violence. They were signs that the duchy was tearing itself apart, and that William was very much a child ruler in a wolf's den. He was forced to move constantly between strongholds for his own safety, relying on a small circle of loyal nobles and knights who remained committed to his cause. But loyalty in Normandy was a rare and fragile thing. To many of the great lords, William was not a rightful duke, but a bastard usurper, an obstacle to be removed, not respected. His survival through this period of time was nothing short of remarkable. King Henry I of France knighted William, still in his teens, in 1042. Taking a new stand on political events, William finally gained firm control of his duchy, although his enemies still commonly referred to him as the Bastard due to his illegitimate birth. By the 1040s, William had managed to survive a decade of violence and political instability, but his authority as Duke was still not secure. Many Norman barons remained hostile to his rule, driven by the resentment of his illegitimate birth and their own ambition to carve out power in a weakened duchy. Tensions were simmering just below the surface, until in 1046, William's enemies decided to strike. While traveling near Bologna on the Cotentin Peninsula, William was ambushed by a group of rebel nobles in an attempt to end his rule once and for all. The plot failed, however. William narrowly escaped and rode with urgency to the royal court at Poissy, where he appealed directly to King Henry I of France. He reminded the king that a rebellion against Normandy's lawful duke was also a rebellion against the authority of the French crown, and King Henry agreed with that. Seeing the danger in letting Normandy fall to unruly vassals, he raised an army of around 10,000 men to support William and march on the rebellious lords. The rebels, led by William's own cousin, Guy of Burgundy, and joined by other powerful nobles, responded by assembling a formidable force of around 25,000 men. It was the most serious challenge William had yet faced, and it would be settled by the sword. The two armies met in 1047 near the town of Val-es-Dunes, just outside of Caen. Though outnumbered, William and King Henry's combined forces defeated the rebels in a decisive and bloody battle. Many rebel knights were cut down as they fled, and others actually drowned trying to cross the nearby river. The victory was more than just a battlefield success. It was a major turning point in William's rise. For the first time, he had crushed a widespread rebellion and secured real recognition as the rightful Duke of Normandy. With the rebellion crushed and his authority confirmed, at least for the time being, William began the long and difficult work of rebuilding and reshaping Normandy. But he ruled not as a grateful survivor, but as a hardened realist. His experiences had taught him that mercy could be fatal, and that strength, not lineage, was the foundation of power. In the immediate aftermath of the battle, William launched a campaign to punish rebellion and restore order. Lands were confiscated from defeated lords, castles were seized, and many noble families saw their influence diminished or destroyed entirely. While some barons were allowed to return to favor, it was clear that loyalty would now be expected without question. The young duke had matured into a leader who ruled with a careful blend of force, diplomacy, and calculated fear. He also took steps to increase centralized ducal authority. William began to curb the independence of his vassals by placing trusted allies and relatives in key strategic territories. He encouraged the construction of stone castles, not just as military fortresses, but as symbols of Norman control and ducal presence in volatile regions. These new fortifications helped secure vital roads and trade routes while discouraging future rebellion. In parallel to this, William worked closely with the Norman Church, recognizing its value in legitimizing his rule and maintaining social order. He appointed loyal and reform-minded clergy to high-ranking positions, supporting the Cluniac reform movement, which sought to root out corruption and enforce discipline within monastic life. This alliance with the church not only strengthened his reputation, but also gave him access to a network of literate, organized administrators. One of the most important political moves of William's early adulthood came in 1053, when he married Matilda of Flanders, the daughter of Count Baldwin V. The marriage gave William a powerful ally in Flanders, one of the most influential regions in Northern Europe, and connected him to a wider aristocratic network of the continent. Pope Leo IX initially opposed the union, citing that the couple was actually distant cousins, but after several years, and likely a generous gift to Rome, approval was granted. The marriage produced several children, including Robert, William, and Henry, each of whom would go on to play major roles in Norman and English history. By the end of the 1050s, William had accomplished what had once seemed impossible. He had turned a turbulent, fractured duchy into a strong, centralized, and remarkably stable power base. The once vulnerable bastard of Falaise had not only survived the murderous intrigues of his youth, he had crushed his rivals, built alliances, and earned the respect of his peers. But across the English Channel, events were unfolding that would soon capture William's attention. The childless death of Edward the Confessor, the current King of England, loomed on the horizon, and William believed that he had a claim to the throne. The English king, Edward the Confessor, had no direct heir. This created a succession crisis that would prove explosive. Edward was part Norman by blood, and his mother, Emma of Normandy, was William's great-aunt, and he had spent years in exile at the Norman court before becoming king. During this time, it's believed that Edward and William actually developed a close relationship, and according to later Norman sources, Edward promised William the throne of England if he died childless. Now, whether Edward ever actually made this promise is still debated by historians, but William believed it was his by right, and that belief would soon become central to his cause. Adding to this, in 1064 or 1065, Harold Godwinson, the powerful Earl of Wessex and the most influential nobleman in England, was shipwrecked. According to Norman sources, Harold set sail across the English Channel, possibly on a diplomatic mission, or perhaps to confirm William's claim to the English throne. No one's quite sure. But his ship was blown off course by a storm and landed in a small territory just north of Normandy. In 11th century France, nobles like Count Guy of Ponthieu, who ruled that region, had the right to ransom or detain high-status foreigners who landed on their shores. It was considered a profitable and legitimate practice. So when Harold, one of the most powerful nobles in England, washed up on Guy's territory, Guy captured him with the intent of ransoming him for a hefty reward. It wasn't anything personal, it was just feudal business. And then when Duke William of Normandy heard that Harold had been captured, he intervened and ordered that guy hand him over. William welcomed Harold as an honored guest, but then, according to Norman chroniclers, compelled Harold to swear an oath of loyalty on holy relics, promising to support William's claim to the English throne. Harold would later break that oath, and William would not forget. When Edward the Confessor died on January 5, 1066, Harold was crowned king the very next day, likely with the support of the English nobility and the Council of Nobles. To William, this was nothing short of treachery. He saw Harold's coronation as an outright betrayal of a sacred oath and a theft of what had been promised to him. Furious but methodical, William began to prepare for war. He turned to his barons and declared that he had been wronged, that his rightful inheritance had been stolen, and that he would take it by force. He appealed this to Pope Alexander II, framing his cause as not just a political claim, but a righteous one. The Pope surprisingly agreed, and sent William a consecrated banner as a sign of papal support. This religious backing gave William's planned invasion the character of a holy war, and it helped him rally support far beyond Normandy. Warriors and nobles from across northern France, Flanders, Brittany, and even southern Italy joined his cause, enticed by promises of land and glory. And over the summer of 1066, William amassed a formidable invasion fleet and an army trained and equipped for conquest. But across the sea, he wasn't the only one with eyes on the English crown. Another powerful rival, Harald Hardrada, the King of Norway, had his own claim and launched an invasion on northern England. England now faced not one, but two powerful foreign threats, and Harold Godwinson would have to defend his throne from both. The stage was set for one of the most consequential years in medieval history. In September, Harald Hardrada, the King of Norway, invaded northern England with the support of Tostig Godwinson, Harold's own exiled brother. Harold rushed north and won a stunning victory at the Battle of Stamford Bridge on September 25, 1066, where both Hardrada and Tostig were killed. But the victory came at a cost. Harold's army was exhausted and far from the southern coast. Just 3 days later, on September 28th, William landed in Sussex with his full invasion force. Estimates range from 7,000 to 10,000 men. He began constructing a wooden fort and raided nearby villages to force Harold to respond. Learning of William's arrival, Harold marched his army south at incredible speed. On October 14, 1066, the two armies met near the town of Hastings. William positioned his forces on a hillside. Harold, who had arrived before reinforcements from the north could join him, took a strong defensive position atop Senlac Hill, forming a solid shield wall, a tactic long favored by Anglo-Saxon armies. The Battle of Hastings lasted most of the day and was hard fought. William's cavalry charges were initially repelled by the disciplined English formation, but the Normans adapted. According to Norman sources, William employed a feigned retreat tactic, pretending to flee in panic, and then turned to strike as the English broke ranks in pursuit. This maneuver, repeated more than once, began to weaken the English line. As the battle wore on, chaos reigned, and near the end of the day, Harold Godwinson was killed. Most sources agree that he died on the battlefield, though the exact cause is uncertain. The Bayeux Tapestry famously shows Harold being struck in the eye with an arrow, but other accounts suggest he may have been cut down by Norman knights. With their king dead and their line broken, the Anglo-Saxon forces collapsed. Victory belonged to William. The battle had been costly but decisive. And although William had won the Battle of Hastings, the conquest of England was far from complete. Killing a king does not automatically win over a kingdom, especially one with proud nobles, powerful earls, and deep Anglo-Saxon traditions. Many regions still resisted Norman rule, and several rival claimants to the throne remained. William had to act quickly and decisively. After securing the southeast, William advanced cautiously towards London, and along the way he took control of key towns like Winchester and Canterbury, demonstrating his military strength and a willingness to spare cities that surrendered peacefully. His approach combined diplomacy with intimidation, and it worked. On Christmas Day, 1066, William was crowned King of England at Westminster Abbey. By being crowned at Westminster, the traditional seat of English kings, William signaled that he was not merely a conqueror, but the rightful successor to Edward the Confessor. According to some chroniclers, as the congregation inside Westminster Abbey shouted their acclamations during the coronation ceremony, the Norman guards that were stationed outside, unfamiliar with the English customs and on the edge in a hostile city, mistook the loud cheers for the outbreak of a riot or uprising. In the panic, they actually set fire to nearby buildings in an attempt to suppress what they believed was a rebellion. The smoke and chaos reached the abbey during the ceremony, startling those in attendance and casting a dark cloud over the solemn proceedings. According to the chronicler Orderic Vitalis, the sudden panic even caused parts of the congregation to flee, fearing violence. Even with the crown on his head, William's rule was still contested. Over the next 5 years, he faced a series of rebellions at different parts of England. The most serious challenge came in 1069, when a coalition of English rebels rose up in Northumbria, supported by Danish forces. The rebellion culminated in a devastating response known as the Harrying of the North. William marched north with ruthless efficiency. Villages were burned, crops destroyed, livestock slaughtered. Tens of thousands of people may have died, not just in battle, but from starvation and cold during the winter that followed. Chroniclers, including Orderic Vitalis, later condemned the campaign as a scorched earth policy that left vast areas uninhabitable. But in a way it worked, because northern resistance was shattered, and no major uprisings followed for the rest of William's reign. In addition to military force, William consolidated power by remaking the English nobility. He stripped lands from Anglo-Saxon lords and redistributed them to his Norman followers, creating a new ruling class that was loyal to him. By 1071, about 90% of English land was held by Normans. To enforce this new order, William began building a vast network of castles across the country, stone fortresses like the Tower of London, designed to dominate the landscape and remind the population who was in charge now. William also recognized the church in England, replacing Anglo-Saxon bishops with Norman clergy, and ensuring that religious authority supported his rule. This alliance with the church helped lend moral legitimacy to his conquest, and provided him with a literate and loyal administrative structure. By the early 1070s, William's grip on England was secure, but he would never rule it as a purely English king. He also remained a Duke of Normandy, with obligations and conflicts on that continent. His reign would be marked by continued tensions between his English and Norman holdings, and by the lasting changes that he brought to English society, language, law, and governance. William spent much of the next decade traveling between England and Normandy, dealing with rebellious vassals, border disputes, and political rivalries, especially with King Philip I of France, who increasingly viewed William as a threat to his authority. William also faced personal challenges. His eldest son, Robert, grew resentful of being denied real power, and eventually rebelled against him. Their conflict escalated into open warfare in 1079, and Robert even managed to defeat and unhorse William in battle. Despite these challenges, William continued to strengthen his rule. In 1085, concerned about a potential invasion by the Danes, he ordered one of the most remarkable administrative feats of the medieval world, the creation of the Domesday Book. This vast survey cataloged nearly every piece of land, livestock, and wealth in England, providing a detailed account of who owned what and how much it was worth. It was a tool of governance, but also one of control, taxation, and power consolidation. No ruler in Western Europe had attempted anything like it before. 2 years later, in 1087, William led a campaign into northern France. During the siege, William reportedly suffered a severe injury, either from falling off his horse or being struck during the assault. The wound became infected, and William was taken to Rouen, where he lingered for weeks. On September 9, 1087, William the Conqueror had died. His final days were marked by regret and reflection. According to chroniclers like Orderic Vitalis, William confessed his sins, lamented the bloodshed of his reign, and attempted to make amends. In death, however, even the king's funeral was troubled. His body was too large for the stone tomb that was prepared for him. When his attendants had forced the corpse in, it reportedly burst open, filling the church with a horrible stench. a very undignified end for one of Europe's most powerful rulers. In his will, William divided his lands up. His son Robert received Normandy. His second son, William, inherited England, and his youngest son, Henry, was left a large sum of money, which he would later use to claim both titles for himself. William's legacy is one of the most profound in medieval history. In a single lifetime, he had risen from an illegitimate child in a fractured duchy to become one of the most powerful monarchs in Western Europe. His conquest of England in 1066 didn't just change the royal succession, it reshaped the cultural, political, and linguistic landscapes of the British Isles for centuries to come. At the heart of William's legacy was the Norman transformation of England. The Anglo-Saxon elite was almost entirely replaced with Norman barons, ushering in a new feudal system rooted in continental customs. Lands were distributed to William's followers, castles were erected across the countryside, and a new French-speaking aristocracy ruled over the English-speaking population. The fusion of these two cultures helped give rise to Middle English. The Domesday Book, completed in 1086, remains one of the most remarkable administrative records in European history. No other monarch in Western Europe had attempted anything so thorough. Its detail is so impressive that scholars still use it to this day to study Norman England. William also redefined kingship itself. He ruled as both king and feudal overlord, blending Anglo-Saxon traditions with Norman administrative control. His claim to rule by right, legitimized by conquest, papal blessing, and his own military strength, set a precedence for future monarchs. But William's reign also left behind a kingdom divided by culture, by class, and by language. Though he had imposed political stability and enforced order through military strength, the cost of that order was steep. The Old English elite, the earls, thanes, and high-ranking clergy, were almost entirely swept away, and in their place William installed Norman barons, most of whom had no ties to the land or its people. These new rulers spoke Norman French, practiced continental customs, and held loyalty to the king who had given them their titles, not to the people they governed. This abrupt transfer of power led to mass displacement of the native aristocracy and sowed deep resentment among the Anglo-Saxon population. The class divide was now compounded by a language barrier, and for centuries after the conquest, the ruling elite spoke French while the common people continued to speak English. Courts, official documents, and royal decrees were all issued in Latin or French. It wasn't until the 14th century that English would begin to reassert itself in administration and literature. This linguistic divide created a society stratified not just by power and wealth, but by communication and cultural identity. The psychological impact of the conquest was profound. For generations, the English would see themselves as a conquered people, ruled by foreign lords who had claimed their land by force. The memory of 1066 lingered in English historical consciousness for centuries, etched not just into chronicles and monastic laments, but into the collective identity of a nation that had once ruled itself. Though William brought unity to England under a single crown, it was a unity born in blood. The scars of conquest were deep, and they would shape English identity, politics, and resistance in ways even he could not foresee. William the Conqueror didn't start life with much in his favor. He was born a bastard in a brutal world, and for years, just staying alive was a victory. But somehow he climbed his way to the top, first as Duke of Normandy, and then against all odds as King of England. And when he took the crown, he didn't just change who ruled the country, he changed the country itself. Language, law, land ownership, even the way castles dotted the landscape. So much of what we think of medieval England has William's fingerprints on it. But none of it came without a cost. His rule brought violence, division, and deep resentment. The old Anglo-Saxon world didn't vanish quietly, it was broken and reshaped, sometimes with fire and sword. And those cracks, they didn't just go away overnight. They lingered for generations. Still, for better or worse, William left behind a different England than the one he found. And whether you see him as a brilliant statesman or as a ruthless invader, there's no denying this: William changed history forever.